Hey folks, welcome back. In the previous few lectures, we saw how to read data in Python. We also saw the concept of fitting a model or passing input to an algorithm, mainly comprises of two steps. Right? First, you need to pass your input and output as different objects, and we will be using the NumPy arrays. And I've given some reading materials also that will help you understand this concept. And secondly, you need to make sure that your inputs and outputs are numerical. In this particular lecture, we will be looking at some code. All right, so let me go ahead and just open up the Jupyter notebook that we were working with. And what I'm going to do is we're going to work with the Iris dataset, the same dataset that we kind of talked about in the previous few lectures. All right, I pressed the button B to go to a new cell. And again, if you press the button H, it will show you all the shortcuts that you can use. And I just inserted a new cell below by pressing the button B. All right, I'll close this and then I'm going to type in some code. Now, Iris data set, right? We looked at the data from this particular website. Now, Iris data set is like the hello world of machine learning, right? And hence, Scikit actually gives you this particular data set inbuilt, and so we can just directly use them. We don't need to go ahead and download it from an URL and stuff like that. But I just wanted to show you that in case you have a CSV file, how do you go about loading that data and working with it. So for this particular tutorial, we'll keep it very simple. So the way you can do that is, first of all, you need to go ahead and use the concept of modules and functions that we talked about. So in the sklearn dot datasets, there is actually an inbuilt Iris dataset. So I'm going to use the load Iris method. And next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the load Iris to get all the data and store it in the Iris object. Okay, so this is right now stored there. And next, what I'm going to do is, of course, let me show you a few things, right? So if you look at the type of this object that I just created, if I press Control and Enter, it's actually something called as bunch. Now, what exactly is bunch, right? You must have been probably heard this for the first time, because normal data types that you hear are objects or integers or strings and stuff like that. Here you see something called as bunch. So what are they? So if we go back to our particular notes, bunch is nothing but it's kind of a special data type that Scikit provides in order to store your data set. So in the bunch data type, there are many attributes. So if we kind of visualize that with the data that we have, the data attribute will basically have the entire data, right? Target will have all the target names or your outputs. So data is all your input values, target is all your output values. As we discussed, these column headers are called as features, right? So if you just use the feature names, it will actually output what are the column names of your input data. And similarly, if you basically look at the target name, it will actually specify the target's names as well. We can quickly look at that in the code as well, but I just wanted to kind of show you how this all relates. So let's look at the data, target, feature names, and target names as well. So how do we do that? So let me go ahead and insert a new cell by pressing the button B. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to let me just print out a few things. So I'm going to print Iris dot feature names, right? So what should it give me? It should basically, these are all the features, these are all the feature names, right? Sepal and sepal width and so on and so forth. So if I press Control and Enter, it will basically give me that information, right? So this is basically our feature names. All right, so let me press the button B and then print out a few print out a few more things. Then we talked about target name. So how does that look like? And again, these are all inbuilt keywords. So target names, if I press Control Enter, it's going to show me the value. So these are all the target names, the prediction values, right, or output values. All right. So let's try something else. Let's try. I always do this mistake. Print. I'll do iris dot target, and it kind of gives me a vector over here, right, of zeros and ones. And if you remember, the two main rules. Oops. Loads. Okay, something happened. So the two main rules that we discussed is basically your inputs and outputs should be numerical. Your outputs are not numerical here, and what it has done is it has assigned certain integer values for the output values. Like, for example, Setosa is assigned number 0, versicolor may be assigned number 1, and so on and so forth, right? So if we kind of look at this particular thing, you see that it is zeros and ones. So it's kind of ready to supply it to our algorithm as well, right? And then what did we forget? Let's go ahead and look at our data as well. So print iris dot data, control enter, and it will kind of show you that particular matrix, right? So two important things you should note over here. I called this as a vector, I called this as a matrix, right? Now naturally you see that both of them are numerical, and how do we really identify whether both of them are numpy arrays, right? Our first rule was that your input and output should be, first of all, different objects that we can definitely put it, place it as different objects, but they should be numpy arrays. And then the second thing is input and output should be numerical when you supply it to an algorithm. Now, definitely they are numerical, but I need to make sure they are, of numpy arrays as well. So I'm going to press the button B, enter, and then the way that you can just test that is you can just say, show me the type of iris dot data, and it's a numpy, right? Similarly, let me go ahead and do for the other thing, right? It's iris dot target, and that is a numpy array. So it looks like the initial portion, the input is getting ready, right? Now both the conditions are satisfied. The initial conditions are getting ready, and then before we supply it to the algorithm, I also told that both of them, input and output, should be different objects of numpy arrays. They are numpy arrays for sure, we just found out. Let's just put them as different objects, right? So I'm going to store the data portion, that is this portion, in capital letter X, right? Because it's a matrix. And I'm going to store all these values, the zeros and ones which we just looked at, those are vectors. I'm going to store it in lowercase y, right? So let me go ahead to in my Python program, and then let me actually the new cell, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to store iris.data in capital X, and I'm going to store iris.target in capital Y, and press Control Enter, and it has stored them, right? So all of our conditions are satisfied. So the first part of it is satisfied, right? We have capital X, capital Y, both are numerical, different objects, they are in numpy arrays. Now the first portion is done. Next is basically we need to supply this to an algorithm. That is what we call it as fitting this data into an algorithm. And in this case, we are going to be using the KNN algorithm. Now, before we proceed further, let me spend about a few minutes actually talking to you what is the KNN algorithm. Now, the goal of this is definitely not going in too much detail of how this relates to in statistics, what are the different equations and stuff like that. But at a high level, I just wanted to tell you what this KNN algorithm does. Now, please note that we're going pretty slow over here, right? We're typing a few lines of code and then talking about some theoretical aspects and stuff. But I promise we'll start picking up some pace. Because any algorithm that you choose here or any input that you choose here has to follow these same steps, right? It has to be two different objects, it has to be numerical, it has to be numpy arrays, and then there is a couple of things you need to know in an algorithm. Once you get that framework very solid in your mind, it doesn't really matter what your inputs are, what your algorithms are. The basic framework remains the same. It's just fine-tuning these two components, right? So that is why I'm going a bit slow. All right. So the next thing is, before we pass on, let's look at what is KNN algorithm. Now, if we go to a Wikipedia link, and I strongly suggest that you read about this, in depth, but let me give you a high level overview. So let's look at some example, if there is an example here. All right, let's look at these numbers, right? These figures. So if you look at this basically has some points in it, right? It's very simple concept. It has some points in it, and what are these points is, just imagine this is your y-axis, this is your x-axis, right? And it basically has an x coordinate and y coordinate, and according to what values it is been plotted in this graph. Let's assume that this red point has an x coordinate of 2 and the y coordinate of 3. So this is, and then the output is, say, red, right? So basically they have gone ahead and plotted these points, and they have colored those points. So this will be something like maybe 5, 2 and blue, right? So they have kind of plotted all these points over here. Now, if you closely look at this, very closely look at this, you can actually draw some sort of a boundary here, right? Just imagine that there is a boundary over here, and you color that boundary as red. All this is red portion. It's like marking your territory, right? You can actually mark a small territory here for green. You can mark a territory here, something like this, for blue, right? Now, in essence of what I'm trying to say over here is, let's assume that you get a point in future which says it's say 6,5. It will be somewhere over here, right? 6,5 will lie somewhere over here. Now, looking at this territory, can you guess what is what would be the color of that point? Whether it will be blue, red, green, or whatever it is. Since we have said that this anything that lies in this particular region is blue, the chances are that it is very likely that that point is blue. Hence, we predict that that particular point that you gave me as an input, the prediction is blue, right? So that is the whole goal of this. So we pick up different values for k, and we start fine tuning these boundaries, right? So if I go to my next image, this is how it looks like. This is what I talked about, right? So you have actually drawn a little boundary over here and marked the whole background as red. Similarly for blue. So next, if a point comes over here, you know that it's basically lying in the green region, hence the point will be green, right? So this is basically called as the k nearest neighbors algorithm. Now I have very much oversimplified this, but definitely you will need to read about this, understand a little bit about the Euclidean space, the distance between 2 points, the distance between neighbors and stuff. But once you understand this whole story which I told you, you will be able to appreciate that whole concept of distances and how this whole algorithm works and so on and so forth. So hope you get some insights on that. Please read the whole thing, and in the next lecture, what we are going to do is we're going to take this a little bit further. Now, since we know that what KNN algorithm is, we are going to take the x and y that we just created and then pass it on to a KNN algorithm and study the patterns, right? How the patterns are occurring, right? Or how the whole model fits in. All right. So hope you enjoyed this particular lecture. See you in the next one.